In the autumn of 1993, during a period of increasing reports of unexplained phenomena in the ancient redwood forests of Northern California's Humboldt County, Thomas Mackenzie, an experienced 41-year-old forest ranger with over 15 years of service in remote wilderness areas, vanished without a trace during what should have been a routine wildlife survey in the most isolated and pristine section of the Headwaters Forest Reserve. Thomas had dedicated his career to the protection and preservation of old-growth redwood ecosystems, developing an almost mystical connection with the ancient forest that made him legendary among his colleagues for his ability to navigate even the most treacherous terrain and his deep understanding of the subtle rhythms and patterns that governed life in these primeval woodlands. During the weeks preceding his disappearance, Thomas had been documenting a series of extraordinary ecological anomalies. Perfectly circular clearings where nothing would grow despite rich soil conditions, ancient redwoods that exhibited impossible growth patterns, suggesting they had been deliberately cultivated rather than naturally occurring, and increasingly frequent encounters with what local Native American Yurok elders described as awakening spirits of the forest responding to some fundamental disturbance in the natural order. His official reports, filed with the Department of Natural Resources, described these phenomena with scientific precision, while acknowledging that conventional explanations fell short of accounting for the magnitude and consistency of the anomalies he was observing. Thomas had also been maintaining detailed personal journals documenting what he described as direct communication experiences with the collective consciousness of the ancient redwood groves, a practice he had developed after years of solitary meditation during his forest patrols. On October 28, 1993, Thomas departed for his final documented survey, carrying specialized scientific equipment, cameras, and the leather-bound journal where he had been recording what he believed were messages from the forest itself about an impending transformation that would forever change humanity's relationship with these ancient ecosystems. His last radio transmission, logged at 14:22 hours, reported his position near the Cathedral Grove, an area containing some of the oldest and largest redwoods on Earth, and mentioned that he had discovered something that validates everything I've been documenting about the true nature of these forests. Tell me, from what country and city are you listening to this story? The initial search for Thomas mobilized every available resource from the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection, including specialized teams trained in wilderness rescue operations, helicopters equipped with thermal imaging technology, search dogs specifically trained for forest tracking, and volunteers from local communities who possessed intimate knowledge of the challenging terrain and unpredictable weather patterns that characterized the Headwaters Forest Reserve. The immense scale and complexity of the ancient redwood forest, with its towering canopy that blocked satellite signals, dense undergrowth that could conceal entire valleys, and fog patterns that rendered aerial reconnaissance nearly impossible, presented extraordinary challenges for search operations that continued for months without yielding any concrete evidence of Thomas's fate. Search teams discovered his Forestry Service vehicle parked at the designated access point to the Cathedral Grove, with all his administrative equipment and emergency supplies arranged with characteristic precision, but there were no signs of struggle, mechanical failure, or any indication of what might have prompted him to venture deeper into the forest than his planned route. Radio logs confirmed that Thomas had followed standard protocols throughout his morning patrol. But after his final transmission describing the significant discovery, all communication attempts failed, despite perfect weather conditions and functioning equipment on both ends. During the extensive search operation, several team members reported experiencing the same type of anomalous phenomena that Thomas had been documenting. Electronic equipment malfunctioning in specific locations, compasses spinning wildly near certain ancient trees, and an overwhelming sense of being observed by invisible intelligences that seemed to emanate from the forest itself. Local Yurok tribal elders consulted during the investigation provided disturbing context about the area where Thomas had disappeared, explaining that the Cathedral Grove had been considered a sacred portal where certain individuals were occasionally called to serve as intermediaries between the human world and the ancient forest consciousness that had existed since before recorded history. The official search was suspended after 4 months, but Thomas's younger brother David, a geology professor from UC Berkeley, refused to abandon hope and established a private foundation to continue the investigation, using scientific methodologies combined with traditional indigenous knowledge about the spiritual dimensions of old-growth forest ecosystems. For 6 years, Thomas Mackenzie's disappearance remained one of the most perplexing unsolved cases in California forestry history, generating theories that ranged from accidental death in unmapped ravines to encounters with unknown species of forest-dwelling creatures. But none of these explanations could account for the complete absence of physical evidence, despite exhaustive searches of the terrain. David Mackenzie transformed his grief into an obsessive scientific quest, earning additional degrees in ethnobotany and indigenous studies, while conducting interviews with tribal elders, forest researchers, and anyone who might provide insights into the phenomena his brother had been investigating during his final months. His research revealed consistent patterns of forest guardians appearing throughout the oral histories of Pacific Northwest tribes, individuals who were selected by the ancient forest consciousness to serve as permanent protectors and communicators, transcending their human limitations to become part of the eternal wisdom of the old-growth ecosystem. In September 1999, exactly 6 years after Thomas's disappearance, a team of mycologists from Stanford University, led by Dr. Sarah Chen, made a discovery that would fundamentally transform the investigation while conducting research on the symbiotic relationships between ancient redwoods and underground fungal networks. Using ground-penetrating radar and advanced soil analysis equipment, the scientists had detected unusual subsurface structures approximately 5 miles northeast of the Cathedral Grove, in an area that had been considered scientifically uninteresting and had never been included in previous search efforts. When excavation began, the team uncovered an elaborate underground chamber system constructed entirely from living redwood root networks that had been guided into architectural patterns impossible to achieve through natural growth processes. Within these living chambers, the researchers discovered evidence that revolutionized understanding of forest ecology. Thomas's field equipment, cameras containing photographs of previously unknown species and ecological relationships, and most significantly, detailed journals written in his distinctive handwriting and dated between October 1993 and March 1996, indicating that he had been alive and actively conducting research in this underground sanctuary for over 2 years after his official disappearance. The journals described experiences that challenged every assumption about the relationship between human consciousness and forest ecosystems, documenting Thomas's transformation from forest ranger to what he called a bridge consciousness, facilitating communication between human civilization and the ancient wisdom embedded in old-growth forest networks. Thomas's underground journals revealed an extraordinary narrative of voluntary transformation, describing how he had been invited by what he interpreted as the collective intelligence of the ancient redwood forest to inhabit these living chambers and serve as a translator between human scientific understanding and the multidimensional awareness that had evolved within old-growth ecosystems over millennia. According to his detailed observations, the redwood groves functioned as vast information processing systems, with individual trees serving as components in a network that stored environmental memories spanning thousands of years and possessed predictive capabilities about ecological changes that human science was only beginning to recognize. His photographs documented species of fungi, insects, and microscopic organisms that existed nowhere in scientific literature, suggesting that the ancient forest contained entire ecosystems that had evolved in isolation from the rest of the biological world. More remarkably, Thomas described developing abilities to access the stored memories of individual trees, experiencing historical events, climate patterns, and ecological relationships through direct neural interface with the living root networks that surrounded his underground research station. Dr. Chen and her team faced an unprecedented scientific dilemma. Thomas's observations described biological processes that contradicted established theories about plant consciousness and interspecies communication. Yet the physical evidence in the chambers corroborated many of his claims about advanced capabilities of old-growth forest systems. Chemical analysis of the chamber air revealed oxygen concentrations and trace compounds that should have been impossible to maintain in underground environments, suggesting that the root networks were actively managing atmospheric conditions to support Thomas's extended residence. Carbon dating of organic materials found in the chambers produced conflicting results that defied conventional scientific explanation. Some samples appeared to be thousands of years old, while others showed recent formation, indicating that the forest's relationship with time operated according to principles that transcended linear chronology. California forestry authorities, concerned about the implications of these discoveries for forest management policies and public understanding of ecosystem relationships, initially classified the findings as confidential and restricted access to the site pending further investigation. David Mackenzie, who had maintained his private search for 6 years, was officially notified of the journal discovery, but authorities initially refused to provide complete access to his brother's research or the underground chambers, citing environmental protection concerns and potential safety hazards associated with the unusual atmospheric conditions found within the root network system. When David finally obtained copies of selected journal pages through legal action supported by indigenous rights organizations, he was both relieved and profoundly moved by revelations about Thomas's voluntary participation in what appeared to be an evolutionary leap in human-forest relationships. The journals indicated that Thomas had been living in perfect symbiosis with the underground ecosystem, deriving nutrition from specialized fungi that the root networks cultivated specifically for his needs, while contributing his human perspective to the forest's collective decision-making processes about environmental adaptation and species preservation. More extraordinary were Thomas's descriptions of expanded time perception experiences where he could observe decades of forest development compressed into hours of subjective experience, allowing him to understand long-term ecological patterns and contribute to conservation strategies that operated on timescales far beyond human planning horizons. The final journal entries described Thomas's preparation for what he called permanent integration, a process where his individual consciousness would merge completely with the forest network while maintaining his unique human insights as a permanent component of the ancient ecosystem's intelligence. The international scientific team, now expanded to include experts in consciousness research, plant neurobiology, and indigenous ecological knowledge, resumed investigations with protocols designed to document the psychological and physiological effects that the underground chambers seemed to exert on human visitors. During these renewed explorations, they discovered additional evidence of Thomas's continued presence. Areas of the root system that had been modified to create specialized research stations, collections of hybrid plant species that showed characteristics impossible through natural evolution, and communication interfaces where Thomas appeared to have developed methods for direct information exchange with the forest consciousness. The most moving discovery was a final chamber sealed with living wood formations that Thomas had apparently guided from within, containing his personal belongings arranged in ceremonial patterns, along with detailed instructions for future researchers who might continue his work of facilitating understanding between human civilization and ancient forest wisdom. The discoveries in Thomas's underground sanctuary attracted international attention from researchers specializing in plant consciousness, indigenous ecological knowledge, and the emerging field of interspecies communication, establishing new paradigms for understanding the sophisticated intelligence networks that existed within old-growth forest ecosystems. Dr. Michael Pollan, author and researcher at UC Berkeley, led a comprehensive analysis of the communication methods Thomas had developed, confirming that many of the techniques described in his journals were consistent with recent discoveries about electrical and chemical signaling systems that trees use to coordinate responses to environmental changes across vast forest networks. The hybrid plant species documented by Thomas were studied by teams of botanists and geneticists who confirmed that these organisms exhibited characteristics that could not have developed through conventional evolutionary processes, suggesting that the forest consciousness possessed capabilities for directed biological modification that exceeded current scientific understanding. Even more significant, when researchers attempted to replicate some of Thomas's methods for accessing forest memory systems, several team members reported experiences similar to those described in his journals. Direct perception of historical events stored in tree ring data, intuitive understanding of complex ecological relationships, and communication with what could only be described as the collective intelligence of the forest. Geological and biological analyses of the underground chamber system revealed construction techniques that integrated living and non-living materials in ways that current engineering could not replicate. With root networks that had been guided to create structural supports, ventilation systems, and even primitive computing networks using electrical properties of living wood. During continued research, team members began experiencing the same phenomena Thomas had documented: altered perception of time, enhanced sensitivity to ecological relationships, and what could only be described as telepathic communication with the forest itself. Several researchers reported encounters with Thomas during deep meditation sessions in the chambers, experiences that provided practical guidance about forest conservation techniques and methodologies for sustainable human integration with natural systems. Dr. Chen, initially skeptical about these non-scientific aspects of the research, began systematically documenting these phenomena when she realized they produced measurable improvements in forest health and provided insights that contributed to breakthrough discoveries in ecosystem management and environmental restoration. In 2001, 2 years after the initial chamber discovery, the site experienced a series of events that transcended conventional scientific explanation and established entirely new frameworks for understanding consciousness, ecology, and the potential for human evolution within natural systems. During documented research expeditions recorded by multiple scientific instruments, team members captured evidence of Thomas participating in forest management activities throughout the region, appearing as a translucent figure who guided the growth of new seedlings, coordinated animal migration patterns, and seemed to orchestrate complex ecological relationships across hundreds of square miles of redwood forest. Simultaneously, environmental monitoring equipment registered unprecedented improvements in forest health indicators, increased biodiversity, accelerated regeneration of damaged areas, and behavioral changes in wildlife that suggested reduced environmental stress and enhanced interspecies cooperation. When research teams established protocols for direct communication with Thomas using techniques he had described in his journals, they achieved breakthrough exchanges of information that resulted in revolutionary advances in forest conservation, sustainable logging practices, and methods for reversing environmental damage caused by human industrial activity. California environmental authorities, recognizing the unique scientific value of the site and Thomas's continued contributions to forestry science, established the Mackenzie Protocol for studying consciousness-based ecological phenomena, protocols that have since been adopted by national parks and forest services in multiple countries where similar events have been documented. David Mackenzie became the official coordinator of communications with his brother and the director of an international research program that uses the underground chambers as a laboratory for developing new approaches to environmental management that integrate human consciousness with natural intelligence systems. The original journals, now housed in climate-controlled preservation systems, continue to display new entries that appear spontaneously, providing real-time guidance about emerging environmental threats and innovative solutions that combine traditional ecological knowledge with breakthrough scientific technologies. Thomas's most recent communications suggest that his transformation represents the beginning of a new phase in human evolution, where selected individuals develop the capability to function as permanent bridges between human civilization and the ancient wisdom systems that exist within threatened ecosystems worldwide. The Thomas Mackenzie phenomenon evolved throughout the 2000s into something that transcended traditional categories of environmental science, establishing interdisciplinary research programs that combined ecology, consciousness studies, indigenous knowledge systems, and quantum physics in efforts to understand the broader implications of human ecosystem integration and the potential for expanded forms of environmental stewardship. Dr. Elizabeth Targ, a researcher in consciousness studies at UC San Francisco, proposed that Thomas had developed neurological adaptations that allowed him to function simultaneously in multiple dimensions of ecological reality, maintaining his human identity while accessing information networks that normally existed beyond the range of individual consciousness. This theory gained credibility when comparative analysis of Thomas's environmental predictions with subsequent ecological events demonstrated accuracy rates that exceeded conventional environmental modeling, suggesting access to information processing systems that transcended traditional scientific methodologies. The underground chamber site became a destination for environmental researchers, consciousness explorers, and indigenous knowledge keepers who believed Thomas had achieved a state of ecological integration that could serve as a model for sustainable human relationships with natural systems. California forestry agencies, recognizing the site's unique contributions to environmental science and conservation policy, established the Thomas Mackenzie Research Center as an official facility for studying consciousness-based ecological phenomena, attracting researchers and environmental practitioners from institutions worldwide. David Mackenzie developed educational programs that taught forest communication techniques based on his brother's methods, programs that have been adopted by environmental studies programs and used by forest managers to develop more effective strategies for ecosystem restoration and conservation. Modern research using neuroimaging technology, electromagnetic field monitoring, and quantum coherence measurements confirms that the underground chambers generate unique environmental conditions that enhance human capacity for ecological perception and facilitate states of consciousness that enable direct communication with forest intelligence networks. In the 2010s, Thomas Mackenzie's legacy had fundamentally transformed environmental science and forest management, establishing new paradigms that integrated indigenous wisdom, consciousness research, and ecological science in holistic approaches to environmental stewardship that have been adopted by conservation organizations and government agencies worldwide. Major universities established programs in consciousness-based ecology that use methodologies developed from Thomas's case to train environmental professionals capable of functioning as intermediaries between human systems and natural intelligence networks. Advanced technology finally enabled sophisticated documentation of the interspecies communication phenomena Thomas had described, revealing electromagnetic and biochemical signaling systems that connect individual trees, forest communities, and regional ecosystems in information networks of unprecedented complexity and sophistication. The fungal communication systems documented in Thomas's research have been validated using molecular biology and network analysis, confirming that old-growth forests operate as distributed intelligence systems with capabilities for information processing, memory storage, and predictive modeling that rival advanced computer networks. Thomas's continued communications, documented through multiple research methodologies over more than 2 decades, have provided insights into environmental management that have been verified through independent research and have contributed to breakthrough developments in ecosystem restoration, climate adaptation strategies, and sustainable resource management. The federal government, recognizing the international significance of the site, established the Consciousness Ecosystem Interface Protocol for investigating similar phenomena, protocols that have been adopted by other countries, where ancient forest systems have demonstrated comparable capabilities for human ecosystem integration. David Mackenzie, now director of the International Center for Ecological Consciousness, continues coordinating communications with Thomas while documenting his continued evolution as a forest guardian who provides guidance about environmental adaptation strategies for addressing climate change and biodiversity loss. Thomas's latest communications indicate that his transformation is part of a global phenomenon where ancient forest systems are developing enhanced capabilities for communication with human consciousness as part of planetary adaptation strategies for ecological survival. Today, more than 3 decades after Thomas Mackenzie's disappearance into the ancient redwood forests of Northern California, his story continues evolving as a paradigm for understanding the potential for human consciousness to transcend individual limitations and contribute to the survival and evolution of planetary ecosystem intelligence. The Thomas Mackenzie Research Center has become an internationally recognized institution for developing consciousness-based environmental technologies that enable direct communication between human awareness and natural intelligence systems, facilitating approaches to environmental management that operate according to the long-term wisdom of ancient ecosystems rather than short-term human economic interests. The discoveries initiated by Thomas have led to official recognition of at least 37 forest sites globally, where similar phenomena of consciousness ecosystem integration have been documented and studied by interdisciplinary research teams combining environmental science, consciousness research, and indigenous knowledge systems. Modern virtual reality technology allows visitors to experience simulations of the underground chambers based on Thomas's journals and photographs, providing educational experiences that have inspired thousands of young people to dedicate their careers to innovative forms of environmental stewardship and consciousness-based ecological research. Universities worldwide now offer degrees in ecological consciousness studies that prepare students to serve as intermediaries between human civilization and natural intelligence systems using methodologies pioneered through Thomas's transformation and continued communications. David Mackenzie, now in his 70s, continues serving as primary liaison between Thomas and the international environmental community, reporting that his brother has predicted most of the major environmental challenges of recent decades and continues providing guidance about adaptation strategies and conservation technologies. The underground chambers where Thomas underwent his initial transformation remain active research sites, with international teams regularly documenting new modifications to the root network architecture, emerging communication interfaces, and evidence that the forest consciousness continues evolving its capabilities for integration with human awareness. Thomas's legacy demonstrates that the boundaries between individual consciousness, environmental awareness, and ecological intelligence are far more permeable than conventional science has recognized, opening possibilities for addressing global environmental crises through forms of human ecosystem collaboration that honor both scientific knowledge and the ancient wisdom embedded in natural systems. His story serves as proof that human evolution need not be limited to technological development, but can include consciousness expansion that enables direct participation in the intelligence networks that have sustained planetary ecosystems for millions of years, offering hope that humanity can develop the wisdom necessary to ensure both species survival and ecological flourishing for future generations.